As of Unreal 5.3, Unreal Insights is officially Unreal Engine's recommended profiler. So in this video, I'll show you all the basics of getting started with Unreal Insights. I'll give you a general rundown of how Unreal Insights works, then I'll show you two different ways you can record traces, and finally, I'll give you a tour of Unreal Insights. Unreal Insights is a profiling tool in Unreal Engine that builds an interactive visualization of all the events that take place during your game's runtime. It lets you record sections of your gameplay and builds the visualization based on these recordings. One of these recordings is called a trace, and it stores the timing of all the trace events that take place in your game's code. Trace events are defined using macros in C++, and they measure the execution time of all the code within a scope. Unreal Insights uses this data to show you the order and duration of every trace event. Each event is shown as a rectangle where the width represents the time it took to execute. When an event is shown underneath another, it means that its scope was nested within the event above it. This nested event structure lets you see your game's performance on a per frame basis, but also lets you drill down to see every individual event that happens during your frame. To access Unreal Insights, you can use the Trace widget at the bottom of the editor. Here you'll find all the options and settings related to Unreal Insights. At the top, the Channels dropdown lets you customize the type of events that will be included in your recording. You can turn different channels on and off depending on what information you're interested in. I'll leave a link in the description to a list of what each channel does. Below it, you'll find the Stat Named Events checkbox, which lets you turn on named events. With named events enabled, your traces will be much more detailed at the cost of a slight performance hit while recording. I recommend you keep this option enabled, especially when you're first learning Unreal Insights. Next, the Trace Destination section lets you select where your traces will be saved to. The two options you have are Trace Store and File. The Trace Store is a shared storage location for traces across all your different Unreal Engine projects. It's also where traces will be saved when they're sent to your PC from other devices. But more on that later. Your other option is File, which saves your trace in the local profiling directory of your game. You can quickly access both of these folders using these shortcuts on the Trace widget. For now, just leave the Trace Destination to the Trace Store. To record a trace, you can use this button beside the Trace widget, which will turn red once you start recording. To stop recording, you can just press the same button again. To see your trace, you can select the Unreal Insights Sessions Browser option. This will open up a list of all the traces in your Trace Store. From here, you can double-click a trace to open it. With that, you should be able to see your first recording. Now, before I talk about the Unreal Insights viewer, I also want to show you how to record traces using console commands. This is important because you might want to record traces on packaged builds to get more reliable profiling data. In that case, you won't have access to the editor and the Trace widget. To start recording a trace using console commands, you can either use the command trace.file or trace.send. The trace.file command will save your trace to your game's profiling directory, while trace.send will send the trace to your Trace Store. Choosing between these two is like selecting one of the Trace Destination options in the Trace widget. To use trace.file, you need to provide two arguments, which are the path and the channel set. The path argument is where the trace will be stored within the profiling directory. You can organize your traces into folders this way, but just a file name will work too. The channel set is a list of all the channels you want to include in your recording, separated by a comma. This channel set is the equivalent to turning different channels on and off in the Trace widget. Your other option is trace.send. This command also uses a channel set as its second parameter, but instead of the first parameter being the path, it's replaced by the host parameter. This will be the network IP address of the device that you want to send the trace to. If you're only ever recording traces on your PC, this can always be localhost. But if you ever want to record traces on other devices, then this will need to be your PC's network IP address. That way, any trace you record on the other device will be sent back to your Trace Store. Just keep in mind that setting up this connection might require some extra steps depending on your device. And finally, the last two commands you'll need to know are trace.stop, which will stop a recording, and stat named events, which will toggle named events just like in the Trace widget. To use all these commands, you can open up the console using the backquote key while playing, or you can hook up each command to an input event. That way you don't need to type the command every time you want to record a trace. Now let's take a look at the Unreal Insights viewer. The timing view is the main window where you'll be able to see a visualization of all the events of the recording. You can zoom in with the scroll wheel and right-click to pan the view. In this view, you can also scroll while holding Shift to go up and down to see all the different tracks in the recording. You can see a list of all these tracks using the All Tracks dropdown, which also lets you toggle them on and off. Now let's take a look at the game thread. The structure of the graph lets you see the timing of your frame as a whole, but also lets you zoom in to see the details of every small event. For example, you can zoom into the character movement component to see all the events that happen during a tick. You can see that the first half of perform movement is spent moving the character capsule and finding the floor beneath it, while the second half is spent updating the transforms of the skeletal mesh and the camera. You can look with this amount of detail into every other functionality of your game, which is what makes Unreal Insights so useful. Moving on, the frames view is where you can see a summary of the frame time across the entire recording. It's useful for navigating through your frames since you can click on a frame spike and it will be highlighted in the timing view. When you have a section of time highlighted like this, the timer and counter views will show you aggregate statistics of the highlighted sections. This way you can see which events are taking the most time within your selection. If you click on an event within a highlighted section, the Callers and Callees section will show you all the events above and below the event that you've selected. So if we select the Physics Walking event, we can see a list of all the events that Physics Walking calls and the events that call Physics Walking. Finally, the Logs view shows you all the logs that happened during runtime. If you click on a single log, it will jump to the point in time when it happened in the timing view. All of these sections can be toggled on and off with these buttons at the top of the screen. Alright, so that's it for this video. If you found it useful, consider leaving a like, and I'll see you next time.